Hi Theo. Thank you so much for taking part in this slightly impromptu conversation on the occasion of the nomination of Space Crone for the Locus Award for Nonfiction, which was a really nice surprise for us. And we're absolutely thrilled, and it's a pleasure to be speaking with you again. So we thought we'd get the ball rolling just by asking you quite simply, what did you think when we got in touch asking if Silver Press could publish this book?
I was thrilled. I thought it was a very eclectic and thoughtful curation of texts. If I remember correctly, I also said it was a bit long in the original iteration and could be made a little tighter. But I think that focus on gender and feminism while crossing a lot of different kinds of writing and genre was really exciting. And I wanted the book to look great, and it does.
Sarah is sharing the beautiful purple of our book cover with her background. Um, and just, we're so proud of this book, and I go back to it constantly, and different pieces jump out to me at different moments and different circumstances. I've really found myself rereading on genetic determinism in the last while, Ursula's rebuttal of E.O. Wilson, and particularly the end, her statement about kinship, networks, relational thinking, and the complexity of being. And Sarah and I were just wondering whether you have a favorite piece that's collected in Space Crone, or perhaps a favorite piece right now that's collected in Space Crone.
I have a soft spot for the Bryn Mawr commencement address because I actually was there. It was the commencement for my now wife from Bryn Mawr. So that was a happy coincidence happening just a few days after my commencement. And so I remember that quite well. It's very long for commencement address, I will say that. It's also terrific. And the last two paragraphs are just the most wonderful barn burning you could imagine for such an occasion. But I really love Sir as well, and I'm delighted that you included that. And it's early in the collection, so the reader is hit with just a great piece of fiction in a book that's mostly composed of nonfiction. I think that is just a clever, very funny, charming, well-researched story. And I share with my mother a fascination with matters Antarctic. And I just love the bit where they end up not staying in the Scott party's hut because it's just too dirty and messy.
Wow, it's really, really interesting. And it feels special to hear about the your presence at the Bryn Mawr speech, which was also one of my favorites in the book. It weaves together characteristically lucid and eloquent ways of speaking about, making it seem so easy, this analysis of different kinds of languages, including the unlearned language, and power, and the construction of the public and the private, and embodiment, and all of these things, and thinking about different kinds of languages. And you mentioned the fiction earlier. We were curious why you think Ursula remains so committed to nonfiction, and what it maybe gave her as a writer of fiction and poetry as well.
Well, I think she was committed to all forms of writing except literary realism. So nonfiction could be carried along with that, as could poetry and everything else. But I do see, in some ways, her nonfiction writing as kind of a counterpoint to her fiction writing, and spending so much time in the realm of imagination, that nonfiction and essays in particular, I think, gave her a place and a way to say things that perhaps could have been said in fiction, and often were, but allowed her to keep her fiction really situated in the realm of imagination, and to sometimes express herself directly in a way that I think is useful and appropriate to her role as a public intellectual.
One of the things that really struck us when we were looking at the range of Ursula's nonfiction was the range of magazines, newspapers, venues, as well as her own blog that she published on. That's something that I'd encountered with her short fiction, but it also really struck us looking at nonfiction, how important magazines are to keeping these forms alive. Here we are at an award ceremony. put together by a wonderful magazine. Could you say a bit about magazines and journals in Ursula's practice, and also maybe what you found in her archives?
Mhm. Well, I mean, magazines and journals, I think, have a special place in the SFF community in that they do create community. I mean, they can act obviously as gatekeepers as well, but perhaps more than in the literary fiction communities where I think journals often act primarily as gatekeepers. And although they may be communities, they can be exclusionary ones. I think in science fiction and fantasy, there is more of a sense of coming together. And also, I would imagine any writer who's first published in a magazine or a journal may keep a bit of a soft spot for magazines and journals from then on. And like so many writers, that's where Ursula was first published. I also think that, you know, essays, blogs are quick to write compared to novels. And that being able to alternate pacing in writing for her was really important, especially as she aged and long form fiction became a tougher and tougher physical act as she talked and wrote about quite a bit. And so other forms of writing, including nonfiction, could kind of come in to help out.
When we were editing Space Crone, we decided to order the contents chronologically. And one of the, more a joy than a challenge was discovering that Ursula didn't necessarily have a very linear relationship to time, which is something that she wrote about really wonderfully in another one of my favorite pieces by her, which is a non-Euclidean view of California as a cold place to be. So, in understanding the sometimes not entirely linear development and publication of essays, we were wondering if you could talk a bit about Ursula's relation to time when she was writing and editing, and also her revising and her revisiting of worlds and ideas.
I think that's a great topic. You go first. Well, I think that, we live in linear time, whether we wish to or not, and it seems as inescapable as capitalism, to borrow her words. I think she sought not to live exactly there when she could, and on a day-to-day level, that manifested in some kind of funny ways that my sisters and I still joke about. There were two calendars in the house. There was the upstairs calendar and the downstairs calendar. And this provided a lot of plausible deniability when appointments were forgotten because something could be written on the downstairs calendar but not have made it upstairs, or vice versa. So there was that practical aspect of time tracking, and appointment tracking was not always perfect. And I think that was partly a strategy to preserve some space to think and write that can be very difficult for any writer, for any artist. And how she came back to matters of time in her writing. I mean, your question is really interesting in that you're sort of connecting her practice and habits as a writer to the whole subject matter of time and how she treated that in her writing. And I don't have a great answer for you because she was a very disciplined writer, a very hard worker. And although it's fun to talk about the upstairs and downstairs calendar, for the most part, she had lots of commitments and met them all. So that was never an issue. She never had a loose relationship to linear time in that regard. And yet she was constantly trying to preserve places that were out of time for herself, and I think for her readers as well, and to question and subvert those relationships with time and with the kind of linear notion of progress and achievement that time tends to represent, especially as you become successful as an artist. I'm not sure that answers your question at all, but I gave it my best.
It's given us some ideas.
I'm not sure there is an answer because as Shevek experiences, time is such a huge subject. All we can do is try and listen and speak across it and in the moment that we have. And when we were thinking about nonlinearity, one of the topics we also think about a lot at Silver Press is dreams and how to make a space for dreaming within, as you said, a capitalist framework that focuses on the rational, that focuses on the linear. And it really feels like Ursula had such a way of living with her dreams. Her other nonfiction volume, the one published in the US, is called Dreams Must Explain Themselves. So of balancing doing dream work and bringing it into daylight and working it through in her fiction. We were very interested in the role that this language of the night, to use another title, and congratulations on the republication of that beautiful book of essays as well. What role that played in her thinking about fiction, and whether dreams also play a role for you.
Well, we were certainly taught very subtly but persistently to listen to our dreams, and not toward any particular end. I don't remember a lot of talk about dream interpretation, but I think again as a way of preserving a space for something that many people choose to ignore or forget, and also perhaps just as a counterbalance to day-to-day reality, you know, to not assume that what is happening in your dreams is somehow lesser or more incoherent than what is happening in linear time. So back to your earlier question, dreams are also a place where all of our assumptions and our day-to-day waking experiences of time are twisted in very interesting ways, because dreams that seem to last a long time are in fact often very short, and things don't necessarily happen in order. So I think just the idea that we shouldn't privilege our waking experience and thoughts above dreams was very much part of our upbringing and part of how Ursula approached her dream time as well. Although she didn't talk a lot about her dreams, so this was not, you know, daily breakfast table conversation by any means, but I know she thought very closely about them.
Well, thinking about the ontological integrity and reality of dreams, as well as their role in memory keeping and memory making, I suppose, could you tell us a bit about more about Ursula's archives? We're curious about where they might be and if you still encounter any surprises in them. Was there any particular encounter that stands out to you?
The archives are at the special collections of the Knight Library at the University of Oregon, and she started that process of turning her papers over to the archives at least a decade before she passed away. There are also some family papers at the Bancroft Library at University of California, Berkeley, that are from my grandparents, but include material from my mother, for example, letters that she wrote to her parents. I haven't spent nearly as much time at the archives as I would like to have. They are open to scholars, so they're accessible, and I believe they are the most requested set of papers in that collection, which is kind of satisfying. But I have been down there both to meet with scholars who are using it and a couple of times to look for material myself. And the thing that always strikes me is how many of the papers include visual art, either as marginalia or little drawings that she sent in correspondence, or maps that she was drawing in preparation for writing something, which was almost always for any long form fiction, was almost always the first thing she did was to figure out the physical space and to draw maps of it. And so the archives are just peppered with these wonderful drawings and maps and illustrations and cartoons, and there are hundreds or thousands of them out there in the world that aren't in the archives because it was rather rare for her to send a note or a postcard or a letter to anyone without including some drawing on it. So occasionally those come back to me, and there's just, it feels like an evergreen supply of these really beautiful little pieces of art.
How many of them were drawings of cats?
That's a good question. I would say that increased over the years. In the 50s and 60s, she tended to do people more, and then cats really started to enter in. So across a 50-year span, let's say I would say minimum 20%, possibly more.
I feel that the next edition of Space Crone should really be Space Cat. We could.
Well, I have a dream of collecting and publishing some of her drawings, and that would include a cat chapter or two or three for sure.
I think one of the few regrets we have about Space Crone was the map for Sir didn't make it into the final publication, but there are other places that people can see it and see her wonderful maps. At Silver Press, we've been so thrilled and honored to be a tiny part of the continuing world of Ursula's work, and the expansion of its range, both in time and space. As part of publishing Space Crone, thanks to you, we were able to run a one-off prize, the Space Crone Prize for New Short Speculative Fiction. And it was such a delight to see how many emerging writers are reflecting Ursula's influence and in what different ways. We had a very robust and exciting jury conversation and then a wonderful event with our winners. And we were very inspired by the fact that the Ursula K. Le Guin Foundation runs the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Speculative Fiction published in the US, and that its nominations are open to all readers, which is a model that comes out of these science fiction prizes. But as you say, it's so rare in the literary world with the gatekeeping and the fantastic lists that I certainly rush to look at and read as it runs each year. And as of mid-June, it's just been announced that in conjunction with Literary Arts, the foundation will be running a writer's residency in the family home. I can't imagine how many applications you're going to get for this. Could you tell us a bit more about this work, your work, of creating community and legacy?
Sure. Well, I'll just pause first and say I'm so excited and grateful to have you in this world too, and thank you for such a beautiful edition. The prize is open to anyone to nominate, so we do place a special emphasis on readers because it's actually surprisingly difficult to convince readers that they are allowed to nominate because so much of the prize world isn't set up that way. But we do include nominations from anyone. So publishers, agents, writers themselves, anyone can nominate, and that's a core principle of that program. The residency actually has been in the works for over a decade, and it was my parents' idea to turn the home over to an organization after they no longer needed it and to found a writer's residency there. So it's really gratifying to see that now public knowledge, because I've been working on it along with Literary Arts and my family and others for a long time. The home is still in use by my family, so the residency will not begin until my dad no longer needs the house. But it was the right time to announce it and to begin to let people know that this is coming. And the principles around which we designed the prize for fiction are actually derived from the principles Ursula set up for the residency before she died. So we signed a memo of understanding with Literary Arts in December of 2017. She passed away in January of 2018. So we were really fortunate to have the bedrock principles and mission for the residency established by her in her words. And I'm not going to say that makes it easy to run a program like this. That's Literary Arts is taking on a big task, but it's great for all of us to have, in broad strokes, complete knowledge and confidence in how to run the program in a way that would have made her happy. By contrast, setting up a book prize in a way that would have made her happy was quite a challenge because certain principles, like opening it up to anyone to nominate, were very clear. But as you know from including her essay on award and gender in this collection, she had a lot of suspicion of literary prizes, and so creating one in her name seemed a bit fraught. So the residency will have I think, a similar open and democratic quality. Certainly part of our mission is to uplift writers who might not normally consider themselves residency material, whatever that means, and to be sure that it is highly inclusive in both process and execution.
Thank you so much for sharing more about your work. It's so exciting to see everything unfold. And I'm certain that, what we see publicly has such a long tail. And we did have a little bit of a think about whether this final question would be too cheesy, but I think given everything you've said, it does feel appropriate to ask you what you think that Ursula might have said had she been, here to accept the award.
Well, looking over the list of nominees, I think she would have said good job on offering some corrective to gender favoritism. And certainly congratulations to the recipients in each category. And probably a reminder for nominees and for all of us that literary awards can be a little pernicious, because she would never want to go out on an uncomplicated end note. But whether this edition receives the award or not, I know she would have been thrilled at the nomination and thrilled at the idea that this nomination could occur so many years after she corporeally passed from this place.
Thank you, Theo.
Thank
That
you,
was really
Theo.
wonderful.